Hi, I'm Ariel. You're watching She Wants Diction, and today I'm going to be doing the tarot book tag. This tag was created by my good friend Charlotte over at Bookish Mama Blooms, and as you can see, I'm in a hotel room, so you're going to have to forgive the bad angle, bad lighting, poor appearance, literally everything. Me, myself, I only own an oracle deck, which is different than a tarot deck because a tarot, there are kind of set meanings to each card, and there's a certain number of cards that it's supposed to have. With oracle decks, it's a lot more open to interpretation and just kind of intuitive and just kind of drawing cards and seeing how you feel about it. Like, honestly, I don't really believe that they do much, but I do kind of find them interesting just as like prompts or creative things or like little jumping off points. But so anyway, the reason I'm in a hotel room is because we are currently in the process of moving out of state, which is really exciting, and I haven't decided yet if I'm gonna like publicly share where I've moved to, so we'll just see. But suffice to say that I'm getting out of absolutely horrible, terrible Springfield, Missouri, and we are moving on, we're moving up in the world, and you know, I could not be happier about that. So the first prompt is called The Fool, a book with a protagonist that is naive at the start and goes through a journey into knowledge. There are so many books that I could use for this prompt, but the one that really springs to mind is going to be Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I mention this book almost every video, I feel like, but Ender is really manipulated by almost every single person in his life. He ends up making some huge mistakes because he doesn't fully understand what he's doing or what the context for what he's doing is, and he's been deceived and misled. And you know, the second book is kind of him dealing with the fallout of this act that he's committed without even really knowing that he's committed it. I'm trying not to spoil anything. So yeah, Ender is unfortunately a little naive, which he should be. He's a literal child, but yeah, he's definitely one of the protagonists that springs to mind that literally has like their world rocked. The second prompt is The Queen of Wands, a book with a strong lead character that has abundance but is not competitive, or an author that is inspirational in this way. And I chose to go with the strong lead character, and for this I chose Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. The lead character in that, I cannot remember her name right now, but essentially she has a condition called hyperempathy, and one of the things that she does throughout the book is try to get all of these different people to work together and come together and share resources. And she's a great leader. She has a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom that she tries to share in the form of this religion that she's created called Earthseed. So I think in that way she has a lot of abundance of like compassion, because she has the hyper empathy thing. Also because she understands the value of community and just like working together to achieve a goal, to band together to survive. All right, the third prompt is called Three of Cups, a book with a strong friendship group that you wanted to be a part of. And I feel like I'm not usually envious of like friendship groups in books. It's usually like a friendship between like two individuals. Not to say that I don't wish I had a squad in real life, because like I totally do, but for this I chose a kid's book. It's called Lightland by H.L. McCutcheon, and I've talked about this book on my channel before. It's a middle grade fantasy, and the reason that I loved it so much when I was a kid was primarily because of the friendship of the main character and her best friend. So the main character is kind of this girl that doesn't really see the point of school because she thinks she's so smart that she already knows everything that's being taught, and also like wears pajamas to school because she just doesn't give two shits. And then her best friend is this boy named Lewis. He can sleep with his eyes open, which is amazing. I was always extremely envious of that ability. And also he is completely silent. The only person that he talks to is this other girl, Lottie. I always felt like their dynamic was like really cool and weird and interesting, and I was like, let me get in on that, you know? All right, the next prompt is Ten of Swords, a book that was painful but hopefully had meaning on the journey. And for this I chose literally Show Me a Healthy Person by Darcy Wilder. And this is kind of I don't really know how to describe it. I feel like it's been classified as like poetry, but it's a kind of experimental stream of consciousness narrative that is essentially this girl just like writing down her thoughts with no holds barred, no filter, essentially. And I will link to the Instagram post where I wrote about how this book basically changed my life. Because it basically kind of made me realize that like I had trauma in my life that was unresolved, like childhood trauma. And also seeing the depiction of an abusive dad, like her dad in this book, some of the things that he said and did, I was like, damn, like it was so relatable. And I feel like it's interesting because in a lot of books I feel like there will be awful mothers, and I've been reading a lot of things on like narcissistic parents, And one of the points that came up was that there's often a lot of like bad mothers in fiction, just because the mother is typically, in our society, the caretaker. So is the one who spends the most time with the child. So usually if the mother is bad, you'll have the most memories of the mother as opposed to the father. And so I just feel like depictions of abusive or bad fathers aren't really very common in like fiction. And her book isn't necessarily like just fiction though. Like a lot of it is very like autobiographical. It was funny, it was dark, it was depressing. It made me really, after reading that, I wanted to reach out to her and be like, girl, you know, you have trauma, you have attachment issues, like you have anxious avoidant attachment, you know, like you have all these things that you haven't resolved. And I truly hope, you know, that she's in a better place than she was when she was writing that book. The next prompt is called The Sun, a book about balance and joy. Perhaps it made you happy or brought you to understanding. And I really had trouble picking something for this, just because I don't feel like I read a whole lot of like happy, peppy books, whatever that says about me. But I chose This Moment is Full of Wonders by Thich Nhat Hanh. And this is a book of his calligraphy. And if you don't know, this is like a Zen Buddhist monk. He's very famous. And I like did a deep dive into like a lot of his work recently because I kind of got obsessed with him. And I wanted to do a whole video talking about like ableism and heteronormativity and stuff like that in his work. But as I said, haven't gotten around to it yet. Anyway, this book of his calligraphy, I kind of have an obsession with handwriting anyways, just because I like the uniqueness of handwriting and I really enjoy just like fonts and typography and all that kind of stuff, because like I was a graphic design nerd, and so I really like his handwriting. It's really beautiful. It makes you want to have like some of these as like art prints on a wall, just because like they're nice simple reminders to slow down and like be present, and like his handwriting is just really gorgeous. And I also enjoy, like in the intro it talked about how he will like be doing a tea ceremony, and so he'll mix a little bit of his tea like with his calligraphy ink and then use that to like do his calligraphy, and like he's very mindful while he's doing his calligraphy, obviously. And I don't know, I just thought it was cool and little short read. All right, the next prompt is Seven of Pentacles, a book about something you have cultivated within yourself or a hobby you would like to pass on. And for this I chose a book that I own, but it's obviously currently packed up, and it's called The Scavenger's Manifesto by Anna Lee Rufus and Kristen Lawson. And I've had it on my shelf for a while. I think I read the first few pages, but I never really like sat down to read it. But essentially it's about like scavenging for things, like thrifting, upcycling, looking for free stuff. And if you don't know this about me, I basically grew up in a flea market. Like my parents owned a flea market when I was a kid, and I spent basically every single day after school in the flea market. So I grew up around like used stuff. Like I'm not afraid. A lot of people like think that thrifting is gross, or like used items are gross or anything like that, but I'm not afraid of like any of that because I grew up surrounded by used stuff, and I just feel like I have an affection for like old, discarded, or like antiques, or stuff that was like pre-worn. Like I have no aversion to used stuff. Like I know that a lot of people do, and it's also better for our environment to try to, you know, rescue things from the trash, which when I lived in Springfield, a lot of my furniture came from scavenging things that people got rid of. Because I lived in a college town, I lived downtown, like really close to a school, a lot of the college kids would move out and then leave stuff on the curb that they couldn't, or they either didn't want to transport back with them or couldn't transport back with them. And so I would take it and like clean it up, of course, obviously, and then like use it in my house. And like almost all of my wardrobe is thrifted. The sweater is from the Lost and Found at the hotel where I worked. And obviously, you know, if no one claims they're lost and found after 30 days, we then get, you know, first pickings of it, whoever found it. And this was in the pile, so I took it home, washed it. It's from Earthbound, so would have been really expensive initially anyway, or more expensive than I'm willing to pay for clothes. And so, yeah, I got like a lot of my clothes that way. Obviously, there were a lot of duds. There's a lot of things I took home and then they didn't look right. But yeah, so I'm a big fan of like rescuing stuff, you know, upcycling stuff. Like I'm not scared of stuff. I don't get grossed out by stuff. I would honestly like to learn how to refinish furniture, like sand it, paint it, and all that stuff. Like that's always been a goal of mine, but like laziness, you know what I mean? Like life, you know what I mean? So hopefully that'll happen sometime in the future. And I'm really excited to be moving to a bigger town because the thrift stores where I live were starting to get really expensive and like really gentrified. Like they would jack the prices of stuff up to where I didn't want to take a chance on anything anymore. And it also sucks because of coronavirus, like a lot of the dressing rooms are closed, and like one of the things that I learned is like when you try stuff on, you find out like what works and what doesn't real quick. And like I have a rule that I won't buy anything without trying it on. So I will literally still try stuff on like find a mirror and then just put clothes on over my clothes to like see, like get a general idea if it'll fit. But anyways, now I'm going to the thrifting tips, which I shouldn't even be doing. So prompt 7 is the world. If you could recommend one book that you knew everyone would read that might change the world for the better, what would it be? And recently I read a book called Chatter by Ethan Kross, and this book essentially talked about how every human has like an inner voice that they use to like talk to themselves, and the way in which we talk to ourselves can have a big impact on like our lives, our mental state, and you know what we're able to accomplish. And I just think since everyone on earth has like a mental voice, if everybody could like start paying attention to that and like being conscious of that, which is kind of related to like mindfulness and stuff like that, then everybody could live a better life, basically. I think a lot of times people are walking around not really aware of what they're thinking or feeling or whatever, you know, because we live in such a fast-paced society. But I think if everyone were to read this and try out the different techniques, that society would improve. Okay, and the bonus prompt was to pick a random card, and I already had my cards packed up. So I used an online generator, and the card I got was Judgment. And for this I chose The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. I think I read this, was it a year or 2 years ago now? But if you've never read James Baldwin, like you really, really need to. I recently gave my brother a copy of his novel, what's it called? Oh, Go Tell It on the Mountain. It was like a vintage paperback that I thrifted. But anyway, if you never read his writing, his essays in particular are kind of a scathing indictment of America and American society and the racism that's inherent in American society. And so The Fire Next Time is kind of predicting what the fallout is going to be if America doesn't choose to change. And obviously this was written in like, I want to say 60s. And so the fact that I read it and so much of it was still relevant today was really, really interesting. And also just sad, obviously, depressing that we can't make progress because we live in a racist country. But I will link the video where I talked about it. And so that was the last prompt. So thank you to Charlotte for creating this tag. If you want to be tagged, consider yourself tagged. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.